Renowned independent journalist Don Lemon has been released from custody following his arrest by Pam Bondi's corrupt Department of Justice.
I want to thank everybody for their support. It truly means the world to me. I have no idea what's going on because obviously I haven't seen anything. I have spent my entire career covering the news. I will not stop now. In fact, there is no more important time than right now, this very moment, for a free and independent media that shines a light on the truth and holds those in power accountable. Again, I will not stop now. I will not stop ever. Last night, the DOJ sent a team of federal agents to arrest me in the middle of the night for something that I've been doing for the last 30 years, and that is covering the news. The First Amendment of the Constitution protects that work for me and for countless of other journalists who do what I do. I stand with all of them, and I will not be silenced. I look forward to my day in court. Thank you all.
I want to talk about what some of the lawyers are saying about this and let you hear what Don had to say. But I really want to bring it back to what we regular, ordinary Americans, not attorneys, not journalists, what we should be taking away from everything that's happening right now, the regime's attack on the free press and the First Amendment. What's our role? What's our role in this? So first of all, this morning I was watching a number of attorneys breaking this down. In particular, Katie Fang was on Don Lemon's channel on his live discussing the grand jury arraignment. And we know from the case against Tish James that ultimately fell apart, the case against James Comey that fell apart, this malicious weaponization of the DOJ to prosecute Donald Trump's perceived political enemies, and the fact that a number of pundits have said, well, Pam Bondi right now is extremely unliked by the regime. They're not happy. Donald Trump and other folks inside the regime are not happy at the way she has mangled the Epstein files. She's supposed to just quietly sweep it away, and it's now become this huge giant thing. And so there's this perception that this is the way she thinks she's going to redeem herself in the eyes of Donald Trump and Stephen Miller and, whatever other puppet masters she's pissed off. Whoever else is in the Epstein files that are pissed off at her right now. She thinks she's going to redeem herself a little bit. So she's really going for it. We know that with the initial charges that she tried to bring, that prosecutors were like, we're not fucking touching this. There's no case here. And that a judge who clerked for Antonin Scalia and is a Bush appointee was like, no, there's no probable cause. I am not going to sign off on these charges. And so everyone was like, yeah, okay, they're not going to be charged. But Don Lemon himself said, I showed an interview earlier, he said they're not going to stop there. They're going to keep coming for me because this is what fascists do. He anticipated that what happened today was going to happen. In particular, because a Trump judge on the appeals court basically told Pam Bondi, yeah, okay, we can't force this lower magistrate judge to sign off on these charges, but you could just go to a grand jury and get your indictment there. So that's what happened, and because a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich, and because a defense attorney is not present in a grand jury, and because the Department of Justice is entirely corrupt and we don't know what they said, what was presented about the facts in the case or the law, charges were brought against two journalists. This is a direct attack on the free press and the First Amendment. And a lot of people are really scared about it. It's frightening that in the United States of America, the Department of Justice is now weaponized as Donald Trump's personal attack team. The rule of law doesn't mean anything to them. They are using their power and the threat of putting you in prison and taking away your freedom as an attempt to advance their authoritarian agenda through intimidation. They're basically saying, we can put anybody in prison, even Don Lemon, even a famous member of the press. We can put him in prison. We can do whatever we want to any of you. Right, so Pam Bondi's going to try and make an example out of Don Lemon to intimidate all of us, because clearly he didn't violate any laws. He was there in his press capacity. He was absolutely within the bounds of the law. But Pam Bondi's like, if I can get charges brought against him, then I'm going to scare other journalists into not exercising their rights. If I can bring charges against Don Lemon, then maybe other journalists will be afraid to cover the illegal actions of the regime and also be afraid to cover the resistance movement. Because it's not just that they don't want us to see the nasty, illegal, awful things that they're doing. They don't want other people to see Americans resisting. They don't want other Americans to see the ways that we're resisting, and they definitely don't want people abroad, right? They want everyone to perceive the resistance as far smaller than it is. They don't want anybody to know. And journalists are the truth tellers. Journalists are the heroes in this moment who are telling us the story. So much about defeating fascism is all about the story that we tell, the story that people hear that prompts them to take action. And then when we take action, we get to be part of that story in shaping the future of this nation. So they don't want you to hear the story so that you don't rise up and become part of it. And small, local, independent journalists, they are doing such crucial work right now. They don't have those deep pockets like Don Lemon. And so the hope, I think, from Pam Bondi was that it would cause people to be afraid. And we're seeing an immediate backlash. We're seeing an immediate surge in bravery, in courage from small local journalists who are out there covering everything. They refuse to be intimidated. But what about those of us who aren't journalists? What about those of us who aren't attorneys, right? There's such an important place right now for attorneys who are willing to uphold the rule of law and to defend their clients, right, against malicious prosecution. Super important. There's an absolute vital role for journalists to play. But in all of this that's happening now, what do we do? What do we do? So as I was listening to Katie Fang and others speaking this morning about the different charges that Don Lemon and Georgia Fort are going to be facing, one is under a very old statute from the 19th century that was basically meant to protect Black Americans from the KKK. And the other one is the FACE Act, which is meant to protect access to reproductive rights clinics. Right? There's a reason that they're using these two laws. They're basically saying we can take the laws that you crafted for good and we can weaponize them in order to oppress you. It's a perversion, it's a subversion of the law and using it to aid the fascists in their cause when those laws were created to help enforce civil rights and help protect vulnerable people and their access. And now we see these laws are being used against Black Americans and the press and their right to access. And when I talked about it this morning, I mentioned the phrase jury nullification, and a couple of people in my comments on YouTube were like, could you talk more about that? And I've mentioned it in the past, and I think this is our role as regular Americans. Well, we have multiple roles here. One, support independent journalists like crazy. Subscribe to them, follow them, donate to them. Whatever you can do to support their work, do it. The second thing we can do is we can all be out in the streets as much as possible. Rapid mass mobilization of large quantities of Americans, that's one of the key elements in resisting fascism. Immediate, swift backlash of large numbers of people, which is what we are seeing in Minnesota today and around the country. There's more of it tomorrow. There's big protests tomorrow. So like Google your town, protest in my town, or look up Indivisible, whatever your grassroots org is, see what they have on the calendar for tomorrow, get plugged in. And then the third thing really is jury nullification. My friend Priya Existing was talking to me on the phone yesterday, and she was saying that when you think about the fact that they're arresting large numbers of people, huge numbers of people, that means more of us are going to have the opportunity to sit on a jury. If you look at the numbers game, if there are going to be more criminal cases because they're weaponizing the Department of Justice, we have a constitutional right to a trial by jury. And when she said that, my first thought was, well, are we going to get in a position like the UK where a judge tried to say, nobody needs a trial by jury? After all, the regime is trying to take away your First, Second, Fourth, and 14th Amendment rights. They're going to trample, and your Fifth Amendment rights, like they're going to continue to try and strip away your constitutional rights. And so at some point, I would not be surprised if they come for the Sixth and Seventh Amendments, but we have to continue to exercise and insist upon our rights or we lose them. So we have the right to a trial by jury. And any one of us could get called to be on a grand jury or to be on a regular jury for a trial like Don Lemon's, if it goes that far. It may not go that far. So first off, a jury could just render a not guilty verdict, like they did with Sandwich Guy, right? Where he was accused of assaulting a federal agent by throwing a sandwich at him. And that whole case was just such a humiliation for the Trump regime. Right, so the evidence does not show that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. You must return a verdict of not guilty. But jury nullification is when the jury returns a not guilty verdict, even though they believe there is evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant broke the law. Remember, power resides with the people, and the reason that we have a constitutionally protected right to a trial by jury is for situations exactly like this. Where the government is no longer functioning appropriately, the Department of Justice is weaponizing the justice system, where the laws in and of themselves are unjust, or the prosecution is malicious and unjust. The people still have the ultimate power to check the corruption of the federal government, of the executive, through a trial by jury. That's very different than an immigration court, where immigration judges aren't real judges. They are lawyers who work for Pam Bondi. And so, therefore, there's no trial by a jury. There's no involvement of the judicial system at all, but for us, we have a right to a jury by our peers, and our peers can decide, hey, I actually think that rendering a guilty verdict here would be unjust. If you'd like to learn more about this, I recommend going to FIJA, that's the Fully Informed Jury Association, and read up a little bit. Read up a little bit on your job as a juror in the United States of America. So according to FIJA, I gotta put my glasses here because it's a little bit far away from me. Jurors may wish to nullify for a number of reasons, including a belief that the law is unjust or unjustly applied, belief that the penalty for violating the law is too harsh, or belief that there are mitigating circumstances that would make strict enforcement of the law unjust in a particular case. Again, I'm not a legal scholar by any means, but I would imagine that the charges against Georgia Fort and Don Lemon don't pass muster in any regard, right? There's not going to be an opportunity for jury nullification because it's going to be not guilty if it even goes to trial. But since we are looking at an extreme weaponization of the Justice Department, journalists, attorneys, experts on authoritarianism are all sounding the alarm today that Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, they're doing Putin-esque shit, right? This is straight up dictator shit, arresting and charging members of the press for doing their job. This is unheard of. I saw one journalist say, this is a line that the United States has crossed today that we can never uncross. This is an ugly stain on the history of the United States. It's a shameful, shameful act. And you could say, well, if they're willing to go after well-known journalists, who else are they willing to go after? Well, they've been charging regular, everyday Americans who immigration agents ram their cars into and shoot and brutalize. They've been charging those folks with assault, and those cases keep getting thrown out. They've been weaponizing the Justice Department with absolutely false charges for over a year now. So it's been happening for a long time, but crossing into charging the press is just like a whole other line. So even though I personally, if I had to hedge my bets, I would say that Georgia and Don's charges get thrown out. But for everybody else, there is the potential when we look at these cases where the authoritarian, corrupt Department of Justice brings charges against Americans. We the American people, have a chance to exercise our power through jury nullification. So again, according to the Fully Informed Jury Association, if you have a conscientious belief that acquitting the defendant is a just verdict, even if you believe that they have technically violated the law, there are only two words that you need to know: not guilty. It is illegal for a judge to direct a jury to deliver a guilty verdict. Jurors cannot be punished for their verdicts, whatever reason they may be. A jury's verdict of not guilty cannot be overturned. Right, let's make that very clear. You cannot be punished for voting not guilty. But we all need to remember that it's a little bit like Fight Club, right? We don't talk openly about jury nullification. If you're in the jury room, right? If you're in the jury pool, and then if you get selected for a jury and you're in the jury room, don't use the term jury nullification. Don't use it during deliberations. Courts have decided that they can pull you as a juror for considering the option to conscientiously acquit. Right? So anytime between when you get called for a jury, you're in the jury pool, you get sat on a jury, you're in the court case throughout deliberations, all the way until the actual verdict is rendered, don't fucking talk about jury nullification. It's your right, but you can't be like, hey guys, let's do a jury nullification here. If you do, the courts have said you could be removed from the jury. Right, so we're not going to talk about it, but it's absolutely something that we have a right to do, and I would argue it's the American thing to do. When we are facing a tyrannical government that is weaponizing the justice system, when we are facing unjust laws, extremely harsh punishments, we have throughout our history, as American citizens serving on juries, rendered not guilty verdicts through this process, through this mindset, this ethic of jury nullification. When the law in and of itself is unjust, when the federal government is corrupt and unjust, when the punishment doesn't fit the crime, it's excessive, excessively harsh, excessively punitive, excessively long, we have the right as American citizens to render a not guilty verdict. We should just spread the word. Everybody, we talk about it now before you get called up for a jury pool. But when it comes to this case against Don Lemon and Georgia Fort, we need mass public outrage. We need everybody in the streets. We need to defend our journalists. We need to be fully in support, because one of the most effective elements of resistance is that we don't abandon the most vulnerable. Kelly Hayes and Miriam Kaba, they say, we don't abandon us. We don't abandon us. We defend us, right? Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. We got to look out for each other, because Sure as fuck the government ain't, right? The government is coming for all of us right now, all of us who care about defending the rule of law. Solidarity means we have each other's backs. Right now, folks being targeted include immigrants, absolutely include our journalists. And so we've got to have their backs in any way that we can.